Welcome again to another episode of the Military Money Manual podcast. I'm your host, Spencer.
And I'm the better looking one, Jamie.
In this episode, we're going to go over the 9 money principles to live your life by. These are the 9 fundamentals of personal finance that I've distilled after reading every personal finance and investing book I could get my hands on. They all basically say about the same thing, and if you follow these 9 principles, you'll pretty much set yourself up for financial freedom and financial independence. So in the last episode, we covered the first 3, which was spend less than you earn, don't accumulate debt, and pay down your high interest rate debt as soon as possible. In this episode, we're going to cover how to save why you should save a 3-month emergency fund, how to maximize your tax advantage retirement contributions, and we'll talk about remembering that savings rate beats investment return.
All right, so emergency fund that may not be a term that people have heard before or used before. So at a basic level, what is an emergency fund? Where do I keep it? And then what do I use it for before we understand why we need 3 months of it?
So an emergency fund is just cash that you have set aside for an emergency. I was first introduced to the concept, I think, with the Total Money Makeover with Dave Ramsey. And I believe in his baby steps, he talks about saving a $1,000 emergency fund.
Initially,
and then going on to other baby steps. But then you loop back around and you boost up your emergency fund to more than $1,000. I pretty much agree with that principle. I think $1,000, even a decade after reading that book, is still a pretty good target to shoot for.
It's better than what most people are doing now, right?
So, there's that study that always blows our mind where, is it 40% of Americans or 60% of Americans
60%
can't come up with $400 in the next 2 weeks to cover an emergency. So by having $1,000, you've already put yourself way ahead of tons of people in being able to not having to rely on borrowing money from friends or family or from payday loans or credit cards. And you can basically smooth out life's bumps, right?
Yeah. So in our first episode, we talked about one recently for us where our car broke down and I had to throw some money at that repair. It was like $2,100 total. And having the emergency fund, it was no big deal.
Right. And then you just boosted your emergency fund back up to its previous levels afterwards. Yeah. And how long did that take?
Until the next paycheck, a day.
Right.
Depending on how much cash we had sitting around. One point of clarification, when you say cash, do you physically mean a bucket, like a Folgers can of cash under your mattress, or just something liquid in a bank where it's readily available?
Yeah.
What do you recommend on that?
What I would recommend is holding it in either cash or what financial gurus will call cash equivalents. So certificates of deposit are another good place to hold them. A lot of people recommend holding them at a separate bank than your primary bank. So for instance, if you use USAA for most of your banking, hold your emergency fund at Ally. I don't necessarily do that. I do have a separate account for my emergency fund, but I don't think it depends. Again, it's all psychological, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people like having the emergency fund at a separate bank, so it just adds that extra layer of
I'm not going to spend
friction, right, to access it. So if you see the money sitting there, it's really tempting to be like, man, I've been saving for this new car, this new bike, or whatever, and I got this money right here. Why not just grab it? But when you do that, inevitably, something will happen in the next week or two where you'll be like, shoot, I really wish I had that emergency fund.
Exactly, yeah.
So in the military, we are lucky that we have a very steady paycheck. Other than occasionally the government shutting down where, Congress can't fund the Continuation Funding Act or whatever it is, our paychecks are pretty much protected. And even most of the time, when they have those kind of government shutdowns, usually the first resolution that's passed is, okay, pay the military,
right,
and then we'll figure out the rest of the budget after that. Other than the Coast Guard. That was interesting, last time, because the Coast Guard's under the Department of Homeland Security, so they actually didn't get paid, I think it was 2 paychecks. Mm-hmm. And USAA actually kind of dropped the ball on that one, because most of the time, if you don't get paid, then USAA or whatever bank, I think actually Navy Federal did step up
Yeah.
and said, we'll cover your paycheck, and then you just pay us back when you get your paycheck. And no interest rate.
No interest rate.
Right. So, I think it helps to, when you're saving for an emergency fund or you're building an emergency fund, I think it helps to think about, like, what would I actually need it for?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be different for each person. So if you're a single airman living in, Ramstein, Germany, for instance, right? Maybe all you need is just $1,200 so that you can buy a round-trip ticket home at the last minute.
Yeah.
Right?
For a sick parent or something.
Exactly,
like that.
yeah. Or, maybe it's a car repair, right? So if you drive an older car, maybe you just need to have a little bit of cash set aside so that when your car broke down, you were able to cover a $2,100 car payment. And
Yeah.
Didn't move the needle at all. It didn't materially affect your life at all.
For sure. One of the other things I've seen people do is, like you mentioned, a high yield savings account bank like Ally Bank or something where they're getting a little bit of money off it.
Right.
But remember, the point of an emergency fund is not to be making a lot of money off of it.
Yeah.
You mentioned Total Money Makeover, and in there, Dave Ramsey talks about how it's an insurance policy, not an investment.
That's right.
So don't be
yeah.
worried about trying to make 8% off this money. It's there as an insurance,
Right.
which when you're paying insurance, it means you're losing money
Exactly.
for the protection of having
Exactly.
that and not having to go back into debt
Yeah.
should something come up.
Yeah, it's essentially it's self-insurance
Yeah.
is what you're doing, and like you said, if you think about it as insurance, well, insurance is literally money that you pay to cover yourself for a very rare or hopefully very rare instances. I found though that with an emergency fund, when you have it, it seems like there's not so many emergencies.
Yeah, it's
right?
funny how that works, isn't it?
It's weird
Yeah.
how that works. But I think a lot of that is because the habits and principles that you need to apply to your own life and the psychology of someone who is thinking ahead far enough to be like, you know what, if I just set a little bit of money aside, I don't worry about, like you said, getting an 8% return on it, and then I just have it ready in case anything happens. Well, once you start building those habits, all of a sudden you realize, well, anything that pops up, I'm ready to cover.
Right.
I'm ready to take care of it.
And you're able to quickly adapt and adjust your priorities in maybe the paycheck that's going to come out
Right.
2 days after or something, and you can cover it until that, and then you just shuffle your priorities a little bit.
Exactly.
But it being liquid is important because you don't want to be without it, and you want it to be lower risk. So if you're investing in the stock market and you have an emergency right at the beginning of coronavirus,
Right.
then your emergency fund is going to be depleted significantly.
Yep.
So be careful with that as well.
And that's how people get in trouble, right? Is when they mix insurance products with investment products. And if you think about the emergency fund as an insurance product, you want it in the most stable, U.S. Treasury bonds, TIPS, if you really want to get fancy, or Treasury or inflation protected securities. Like I said, certificates of deposit are actually a really good place to go. And some people are hesitant of it because they might have a early redemption fee
yeah.
or penalty. But usually, if you look at it, it's all you're doing is you're forfeiting like a couple months of interest.
Yeah, so you're forfeiting a percentage of the interest you've earned, and you can get the money you've put back. Most of the terms,
Most of the
I think,
time,
are set up
you
like
can
that.
get 100%, and usually you get some of the interest.
Yes.
You just maybe instead of if you had it there, if it was a 2-year CD, for instance, it might have a 6-month penalty clause where if you take it out after a year, you only get 6 months of interest. The way interest rates are right now in 2021. That won't be that much money. I mean, it's hard to find a CD that pays higher than 2-3%.
Even a high interest bank doesn't really exist right now.
No.
Most of them are 0.4%
Yeah.
and stuff like that. But just 2 years ago, you could get 2.75 or
Right.
something like that on a
Right.
savings account, and that would be a great spot.
Well, I remember when I took on my USA Career Starter loan in ROTC in 2008, just as the global financial crisis was coming around, I was able to lock in 5-year CDs for 5%.
Wow.
So that was great.
Yeah.
And the loan was only 2.99%, so I was making 2% on arbitrage right there. But that's harder to do these days.
Is there ever a time where we would want more than 3 months emergency fund? So I know we kind of use that as a guide, but maybe a life event like you're separating or you're having a second kid, so your spouse is going to stop working, so maybe you stash a little bit extra in there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the 3 months recommendation that I make in the book, the Military Money Manual, which will be available on Amazon and the website, militarymoneymanual.com. The 3 months that I recommend is really because, military pay and military lifestyle, I mean, besides, the random TDYs and deployments that get dropped on us with almost no notice, it's pretty predictable.
Yeah.
You know you're going to get paid on the 1st and the 15th. And if there's any kind of separation or you're getting kicked out, you usually have at least 6 months, usually sometimes up to a year of warning. And you can kind of plan for it. Separation is definitely a time where you might want to dial back your investment contributions a little bit and dial up your emergency fund. And maybe instead of having a 3-month emergency fund, which when we say 3 months, we're talking about covering 3 months of expenses, right? So it's not necessarily 3 months of income, but for, say someone spends $4,000 a month on their, rent, food, car, all their various expenses, and you can adjust it too. So let's say, well, if I had a real emergency, right, maybe I don't shop at Whole Foods and I do more Costco shopping.
Yeah.
Or
if I lost my job, I would cancel Netflix.
Exactly. Yeah. You can kind of adjust your budget and say, well, what is the bare minimum here? Rent, food, health,
transportation.
There's like maybe you're not going on vacation for a week if you're losing your job. So that's kind of why I recommend the 3 months, because I think it's enough to cover anything you need. It's really for anybody who's like, I don't know what to do. For myself personally, initially it was kind of $5,000. I just liked it was a nice round number, and it would cover a $1,000 car repair, round trip tickets home to either my family or my wife's family, and our living expenses were very lean back then, so it would cover that as well. Now I kind of have the number in my head is $10,000, but again, it's completely dependent on the person. It's what can you sleep well at night with, and so for some people it's very they having $10,000 sitting around in a savings account getting 0.01% when they could have it in the stock market getting 8%. They're like, well, I gotta leave 5,000 of it in the stock market. But again, like $10,000 is not going to, in the long run, probably isn't going to move the needle, right? It's probably, at least for me, it's better to have the money set aside in an emergency that I can tap. I can access that cash immediately. And I don't have to worry about selling stocks when they're low or capital gains tax or anything like that.
I've seen a lot of people worry about, like, what is the right number?
Yeah.
And I think that's a good conversation, too, of it. Don't worry so much about whether 5, 10, or maybe even $30,000 is the right number for you. If you're not sure, you can start somewhere, start something, do something, and then adjust the number later. Like, if you have, say that you thought at one point you wanted $30,000 of emergency fund when you looked at 3 to 6 months of expenses or whatever,
right?
And then if later on you reevaluate your expenses or you double check your math and things change, you move to a lower cost area, moving from Hawaii to Alabama, for example, something like that, and that will change my numbers. Ours is a little higher right now because as I came up on my active duty service commitment, we bumped up our emergency fund to be able to cover a break in employment, where if I were to go to an airline and not get hired for 6 months, then we would have that set aside. So maybe that's another scenario where there's going to be a break in employment after separation, or your first couple years at your next job, you don't expect to make as much as you're making now.
Right.
Something like that, you can cover that with some extra savings in your emergency fund.
You
have lots of options.
Yeah. One thing that a lot of guys do is get out and use their GI Bill, right? And that has a BAH component to it. But if you've been diligent and let's say you only do a 4 or 6 year enlistment or active duty service commitment, and at the end of it, you've got several $1,000s saved up that you can basically just live on that while you go to school, and kind of supplement your GI Bill, and you can have a great time. Because you're going to school, you're getting education, but you got this money saved as well to support your lifestyle. And you don't have to, live like a student in poverty.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit last time about the psychological and emotional benefits of it, and just having that emergency fund. You mentioned earlier, when you have it set aside, you seem to not have as many emergencies because you can handle a lot that comes your way. So 3 months of emergency savings, and it just takes a little bit of the stress of budgeting and life and Murphy happening.
That's right. Got to watch out for Murphy. All right, so we talked about saving a 3-month emergency fund. We'll move on to the next of the 9 principles, and that's maximizing your tax-advantaged accounts. And really what we're talking about here is retirement accounts. So for most military service members, your primary retirement account is going to be the Thrift Savings Plan, or the TSP, and then you also have access to individual retirement arrangements or individual retirement accounts, also known as IRAs. And these two types of accounts come in 2 different flavors. So it can get a little bit confusing with some of the terminology. But if you just think about anytime you hear a Roth, so whether it's a Roth TSP or a Roth IRA, you're paying the taxes now. And then when you're in retirement, you don't pay taxes on that money.
And it's growth.
Yeah. Right. So the deal that the federal government is saying is they're basically saying, hey, you are allowed to put money into this account that you pay taxes on. It can grow, hopefully over 40 or 50 years at a good 8% return, and it doubles 4 or 5 times. And then in retirement, you can pull the money out, and you don't have to pay taxes on it. So that's a really good deal, especially for military service members. Because our tax rates are so low.
Yeah.
And so much of our income is untaxed allowances, like BAS, BAH. I think flight pay is even I know it's a pay, but I think it's
Yeah, I know the cost of living allowance
cost of
too.
living allowance,
For sure, anything with allowance in it is non-taxed income.
Yeah.
And quick plug for episode 2 was an entire episode about the TSP.
That's right.
So if you haven't listened to that yet, that one was a long one, almost an hour, all about the TSP and the different options you have there.
Yeah. And then so we talked about Roth. So Roth, you're paying taxes now, and the other flavor again. So you can have all 4 of these types of accounts, but the other flavor is traditional. So in the traditional retirement accounts, you skip paying taxes now, and you pay taxes when you're in retirement. So when you pull the money out after age 59 and a half, you pay income tax on it. And you might wonder, well, why would anyone do that? And the reason is, as you make more money and you move up the tax brackets, your income while you're working is hopefully or is usually higher than your income when you're in retirement. Because when you're in retirement, you're not working for money anymore, so you're drawing down your retirement savings. And so the tax rate, if you can defer paying the taxes on the money that you're making now, and this, like we've talked about in the TSP episode, this usually kicks in if you're, let's say, a dual mill 03 to 03, or if you're a single 04 or a married 04. This is when traditional really starts making a lot of sense. And again, you can have a traditional IRA or a traditional TSP, and at the same time, you can have a Roth IRA and a Roth TSP, and you can. I think what a lot of people, get hung up on, well, which one should I contribute to? And again, do something. Just do something. Yeah. Contribute. Just contribute.
Pick one, and then as you learn more, you can adjust fire.
Exactly. Adjust fire as you figure out, and if you do a whole year of traditional contributions while you're in a tax zone, and you realize, man, that was dumb because I didn't pay any income tax that year, and now that money is in a traditional account, and while the money will come back out untaxed because it was a combat zone tax exclusion contribution, the growth is going to be taxed. Mm-hmm. So you're like, man, that was really dumb. I should have done a Roth IRA and a Roth TSP that year. Well, live and learn.
In 1 year, it's not going to be a big difference. No. Hopefully, if you set yourself up for success.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, and the reason that the government offers these tax breaks is because they want to encourage people to save for retirement, and they want people to invest for the long term. So it's really important that you maximize your tax advantage contributions every year, because as soon as you move into the next year, December 31st rolls around and it's January 1st, you've now lost the ability to contribute, to your tax advantage account. So, for instance, a Roth IRA, right? You get $6,000 in 2021. You get $6,000 a year of contributions you can make to that. If you wait and then it becomes 2022, you're like, man, I have $12,000 sitting around. You can only put $6,000 in there. Now, if you're married to a spouse, even if they don't work, you can contribute to their Roth IRA, which is another thing that a lot of military service members miss, and it's not covered very well. But if you're married, you have a spouse, you're married filing jointly, even if they don't work, even if they just work out of the home or do whatever they do, they don't make income on like a W-2, you can still contribute to their Roth IRA. Yeah. And that's a huge, I mean, you're basically doubling your retirement benefits at that stage.
It can be surprising how much $6,000 a year can add up. But also it would expect that your Roth IRA or your traditional IRA is not the only investment avenue and retirement plan you have. But if you do $6,000 into your IRA and you work towards maximizing your TSP as you get in a couple more years and your income grows, you're going to be well ahead of most Americans and in a very good spot if you keep up that progress.
All right, I'm going to play just a quick game since we're talking about contributing to your retirement
like
accounts.
A quiz?
Yeah.
Oh,
so here we go.
man.
Okay,
right.
So let's. Well, it's a math question.
Okay.
All right.
I'm a history major though.
I know. So here you go. Okay, so let's say you're 20 years old,
okay.
right? You have no money in your Roth IRA, and you contribute $6,000 to your Roth IRA for 40 years at a 7% return. Okay, so 20, 40 years. Now you're 60 years old. How much money do you think you'll have in your Roth IRA?
Continuing $6,000 a year.
Yeah, you're doing $6,000 for 40 years.
1.2 million.
It is 1.2 million.
Is it really?
That's
I'm
so
a genius.
Good. You are
I promise to the listeners, I do not have that up on my screen anywhere.
So what's crazy about that, right, is you only contributed $240,000. Again, this gets back to compounding interest, right? Like, it is the most powerful thing in the world, but it takes a long time to kick in. So you'll hear people talk about like the rule of 72. Where basically you take whatever the rate of return is, you divide it by 72, and that's how often it'll double, right? So if the stock market returns 7.2%, for instance, rule of 72, 7.2 divided by 72, 10. So it takes 10 years to double. So, but the point here is small contributions. I mean, that's $500 a month, right? But it's over a long time, and when you do that, you really just let compounding interest go to work for you. I mean, and that's like the whole point of financial independence and retiring early, right? That whole movement is like putting this amazing wealth generating machine called the U.S. stock market, or properties like investment rental properties to work for you, so that you don't have to work. So that's a little. I mean, you can really deep dive into, which tax advantage account is right for you, and I talk about that in the book. But for most people, most military service members, Roth is the right way to go,
especially starting out.
Yeah.
Or if you're deployed.
Yes. Yeah, and that's another one too. Is here we are in 2021, and Afghanistan's winding down. Iraq is
for the third time.
Yeah. And Iraq is doing whatever it's doing. But there will always be deployments. There will always be the Adriatic Sea from Kosovo is still a designated combat tax exclusion zone. So if you happen to fly through there in a military mission, guess what? You just got that month tax free.
Yeah.
So lots of opportunities. It happens I know in the Navy too. They sail through the Persian Gulf pretty often, and that'll probably be a designated tax-free zone for many years. But Roth TSP, Roth IRA are definitely where you want to start. But again, like, this is a great topic. Do your own research. But if you don't want to do your own research, just go Roth TSP, go Roth IRA, maximize your annual contributions to both of those. And I guarantee you'll be a millionaire within probably 20 or 30 years.
And not getting too much into investment advice, but if someone doesn't know what to do to start a Roth IRA, where should they go if they want to do an IRA or something outside of the TSP?
Yeah, so I highly encourage people to start with the TSP. If you're not maxing your TSP yet, first of all, why not? Which could be an income thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of the younger enlisted, and even lieutenants, honestly, or ensigns don't make enough money.
Or if they're paying off a lot of debt.
Or exactly.
Which they need to listen to our podcast from last week.
If you listen to the last episode, we talked all about paying off your debt. But I mean, I think the easy button for me is Vanguard for the IRA. That's where I hold my IRA. Both my traditional IRAs and my Roth IRAs. My wife's are there as well. I have no problem recommending Vanguard to anyone. And really, Fidelity, Schwab, any of those guys, you're not going to have any problems with cost or any of the. They've been around for decades. They're very reputable organizations.
Yeah.
They're all audited, and
some of the funds may be more expensive than others, though.
That's true. So once you
and
that is the tricky part with the individual retirement account, the Roth IRAs. You have to choose the investments that are inside it. So like my dad gets super fancy, right, and he actually holds properties inside some of his individual retirement accounts. I think actually it's a SEP IRA, but that's a whole other topic. But if you mirror what's in your TSP, in your IRA, you'll probably do all right. Vanguard also offers a personal advisory service, or PAS. It's 0.30% a year, or 30 basis points. And that's a pretty good rate for, if you look at like Betterment, I think is a quarter of a percentage point for their investment, their tailored portfolios.
Yeah.
So,
and if you go to a place in town, you pay 1.25, sometimes more.
Yeah, 2%. And
which
that really eats
over
away,
the long run.
Yeah, at your investment returns.
So again, there's a lot of stuff with retirement accounts, IRAs, TSPs, Roth versus traditional. That's going to be really deep dive in the Military Money Manual book and on the previous episode. But we already did a whole episode on the TSP. But the main thing for this point of the 9 principles is to maximize your tax advantage accounts, which is a huge benefit for the military.
Right.
We deployed Roth, the amount of money we get that's not taxed, and just take advantage of those while you can.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be mentioned enough, right? With the combat zone tax exclusion, you're getting tax-free income. You put it into your Roth. The government's like, okay, that money was already taxed. Now it's growing untaxed for 20, 30, 40 years. And then when you get to retirement, you get to pull that money back out untaxed.
Yeah.
So it's a triple tax benefit, which is, I did a guest post on madfientist.com, and if you just Google Mad Fientist military fire, it should pop up right away. But that is like a benefit that not a lot of people talk about, and military service members can really maximize their tax advantages. And depending on your tax rate, whatever bracket you're in, that could be a 10, 15, 20% basically increase in the value of the account because you never pay taxes on it.
And this is not, it doesn't depend on your rank or your income level.
That's right.
Everyone can take advantage of this benefit, even if their tax percentage is smaller than someone else's. It's not just something that like a colonel or someone in for 30 years is going to take advantage of.
Yep.
It's a benefit for everyone.
Yep.
All right, so the next one, let's move on to savings rate beats rate of return.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to get the point I'm trying to get across here is that if you're going for early financial independence, the amount of money that you can save every year as a percentage of your income is way more important to achieving financial independence than the investment return that you get.
Yeah,
and that's just because compounding interest takes a long time to build up and start, giving you those returns that are going to grow your accounts faster than you can save.
Right. So the savings rate, when you're talking about that, you mean, if I'm making $50,000 a year, what percentage of that money is going into savings?
Exactly.
And you would break that down into monthly and per paycheck or whatever if you wanted to go further. But what percentage of the money coming in is going into savings, basically?
Exactly. So let's say you made $60,000 and you maxed out your Roth IRA at $6,000. You can, debate, okay, are we doing it pre-tax, are we doing it post-tax? But again, the important thing to focus on is do something and just say, look, I made $60,000 a year after taxes. I saved $6,000, and that's a 10% savings rate.
Yeah.
So in the book, I have this great graph which basically breaks down the years to financial independence based on your savings rate. So how many years you have to work, assuming a 7 or 8% return. I think the graph assumes a 7% return, and it's it's a pretty astounding graph, because what it shows is if you follow the standard CNN Money.com advice and save 10 or 15% of your paycheck, you're going to be working for 40 or 35 years. I mean, it's just math. But if you can crank that savings rate up and start going, way past what like most people would consider reasonable,
Yeah.
and start getting into the 20, 25, 30, 40, 50% savings rate range, all of a sudden you're shaving decades off of your working life. And I think this graph is one of those like really powerful graphs that demonstrates like you can make a choice, right? Like you can increase your income, keep your expenses the same and increase your income and save that additional income that you're making. Or you can trim your expenses and again, keep your income the same. Or you can do both at the same time and increase your income, decrease your expenses, and save that gap. I think one thing about that, whether you cut your expenses or increase your income, is you can increase your income infinitely, right? Like there is no limit to how much money you make. There is a limit to how much money you can cut.
Right.
And so that's one of those, the quickest way I think to financial independence is building multiple streams of income, and you can't really budget your way. I mean, you can't really cut your expenses to rapidly achieve financial independence. You have to. It's two sides of the equation.
Right. It's got to be a combination.
Right. It has to be a combination.
Yeah. And so when you're looking at if someone continues to have multiple streams of income or some really good side hustle or whatever, if they just keep making a lot of money, but they're spending a lot of money, like we talked about last episode with a professional athlete or something like that.
Right.
So there's definitely two sides to that coin. You got to balance it for sure.
Yeah.
But just an example, like you mentioned already on the working years versus saving rate chart that's in the book that's coming out soon. So at 15 years, it's about 43. At 15%, it's about 43 or so. It looks like
working years
remaining. But if I bump up that savings rate to 50%, I'm at 18 years or so, depending on how fat my finger is on the chart of working.
Yep.
And so when I first heard 50% or 40% savings rate, and I guarantee you, there's people listening that think that's crazy.
Yep.
There's no way we could do that.
Yeah.
But you can.
Yeah.
Like we have.
I've done it.
And we're not special.
No.
So what's the most savings rate that you had in a year?
Probably 50%. But here's the thing, right, is that was just my paycheck.
Yeah.
My wife worked as well.
Yeah.
And we saved her entire paycheck. So really, I mean, it was probably a 70% savings rate. And I think for a lot of people, if you are a couple and you're both working, just living off of one paycheck and saving the entire other paycheck, I mean, that's a 50% savings rate right there.
Yeah.
So as a couple, you know? And I mean, we can get into, we'll probably have to do an episode on that about like how to combine finances when you're married and stuff. But I mean, you should be working towards the same goal anyways.
For sure.
And it can be various degrees of how much you're integrated, but a lot of people, when they hear 50% savings rate, they're like, that's insane. Mm-hmm. I could never do that. But if you're married and, both of, or you have a partner and both of you work, then just living off of one paycheck, and you don't have to spend that entire paycheck, right? You could, make sure that person is maximizing their tax advantage retirement accounts, saving in their Roth IRA, their Roth TSP, and then you live on the rest, and then the other person, you just save all of that money.
Yeah.
I know some of our dual mill friends who live in Hawaii. I mean, they're clearing $250,000, $300,000 a year probably. Once you start,
and hopefully saving a lot of it,
and hopefully right, and that's huge.
Yeah,
right. Like they they are, if they want to, financial independence is within reach.
Yeah, it's very close.
Very close.
We had the best year we had was 47%.
Yep.
With one income at the time. My wife was not working, and like it's possible. It doesn't have to be a dual mill thing. It doesn't have to be both working and bringing in income.
How many kids do you have at the time?
We have 2 kids at the time.
Yeah. So like a lot of people when I tell them my story, right? They're like, "Oh, do you have kids?" And the answer is no. And they're like, "Well, then it's easy." It's like, well, no. I mean, it's not. It might be easier to, because I don't have those additional expenses.
Yeah.
But it's still possible.
Yeah, but I also don't go out to a bar on Friday night and spend $100 on Mai Tais.
Yeah.
I'm in bed because I'm tired. But yeah, so it's not just for officers, it's not just for mill-to-mill couples or dual working couples. An airman that lives in the dorms, their expenses are very low.
And their savings rate, right.
Could be very high.
Could be very high.
Even though it's not a huge amount of money necessarily, your savings rate could be clutch.
Yeah.
And then if you continue to keep that rate as you get more money and promote and get pay raises every 2 years or so, that's going to be very huge in the long run.
I think one of my favorite facts about the savings rate beats rate of return is that if you have a 45% savings rate, you can achieve financial independence in less than 20 years, which is exactly when the military pension kicks in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think for the above average military service member who does stay in for 20 years, not only can you earn under the BRS the 40% pension, under the legacy the 50% pension, but you could be financially independent on top of that.
Yeah.
Right? And so now, not only do you have this inflation adjusted pension that is paid by the U.S. government every year or every month for perpetuity, but you also have you're financially independent in addition to that, right?
Yeah.
So you can factor that in, right? So if you are planning on going for 20 or you're getting close to 20 years and you're like, well, my pension's going to be this, well, then you can just subtract the amount that you need to save to be financially independent. And then when you're done with the military, you can be done working.
Yeah.
And that's something that, Doug Nordman, he lives here on Oahu, and he's got his website, themilitaryguide.com. It's got hyphens in between, the-military-guide. And he wrote a book, The Military Guide to Financial Independence and Early Retirement. And that was his big aha moment was when he retired at 40, or when he retired from the military at 43. And, he'd been saving his whole life, made some investment mistakes, but, still saved a lot, bought some real estate, and realized that between his pension and all his savings, he didn't have to go back to work. And he was even looking at, that classic, okay, got to go get a GS job. That's what you do when you retire from the military. And he was like, no, or I could just surf.
Yeah. And I think that's the huge benefit of, when I first heard about, a FIRE movement or financial independence, however many years ago, it sounded kind of like a spook of, like a scam or some kind of marketing scheme or selling makeup to someone, MLM or something. But in reality, it's just about you having the choice. Like if you want to work, then work. But if you don't, you don't have to.
Right.
And that's powerful. So if I were to stay in the military for 20 years, I could retire from the military at age 41.
Right.
And imagine being done, or if I wanted to be, or I can start a side hustle. And if it fails, so what? Because I still have enough to live off of. Or it is even better, and then I can donate more aggressively and be a philanthropist and whatever. Take care of my kids and build generational wealth, or die with zero, whichever way I want to go. But it's all about choices, and I have the choice to control what I do at that point.
Yeah, I think giving people, letting people know, you do have a choice, and it's completely independent of, what the stock market does. And I think it's really empowering to people to realize that it's more about the things that you have control over, right? So there's this concept in psychology, locus of control, right? Are you a externally focused person or an internally focused person, right? So do things happen to you, or do you make things happen?
Yeah.
And when you internalize the principles of financial independence, and you recognize that your savings rate, which is something that you can control, beats the rate of return, so whatever the stock market returns, which is usually how I recommend most people invest who are going for financial independence, whatever it returns, it's going to return, right? You have absolutely zero control over that. It's a random number generator, right? Like some years it's down 36%, some years COVID happens and it drops 30% in 30 days, and then it comes roaring back. And what was our TSP up like 66% or something over
crazy
12
over the last 12 months? Yeah.
So, just recognizing that the market will return what the market returns, and if you stay focused on the things that you can control, like your personal savings rate, and whether that's increasing your income, decreasing your expenses, or doing both at the same time, and rapidly achieving financial independence, that's within your control. You have the power. You can do it.
And we mentioned last time about taking on a side hustle like Uber driving or something like that. One of the techniques you could employ is by doing something like Uber or delivering pizzas or whatever it is on the side, and then all of that paycheck that comes in goes straight to your investment and saving stuff. So you never even view it as an expense. It just accelerates that.
Just accelerates.
And it's just a gazelle intense focus on your goal. And if you really want it, you can find a way. Is there a magic number? Probably not, right? But would you recommend where would you recommend they start on savings rate if they feel like 50% is a little too much to think about right now?
Yeah, so it's so difficult because it's one of those things where it's like, I mean, if you look at the graph, right, it's like, well, how long do you want to work? Because that's what your savings rate is going to determine. Now, when you first find out about, all the personal finance stuff that you weren't taught in high school, right? When you get into the military and you start making a paycheck and you're like, well, what am I supposed to do with this money? And you purposely rack up credit card debt, right? And you find yourself in this hole and you're like, shoot, 50% savings rate. Like, man, I'm just trying to get to the next paycheck. It can be really hard to give someone any individual a specific number, right? So I think the first thing you got to focus on, especially if you're in the BRS, the blended retirement system, is you got to do 5% of your TSP. You got to get that full match because that's 100% return right there. And then after that, take a look at the graph and say, okay, like this year I'm doing 5%, but you know what? Next year I'm going to get a pay bump because I'm going to promote and I'm going to make it 10%. And look how many years you just shaved off of your working life, right? Like life's short. Like if you love what you're doing, good. Like choose to do that, right? But don't keep doing it because you don't have a choice.
Right.
So create choices for yourself. Create the freedom for yourself. And, every year or so, go back to that graph and say, all right, now I'm going to bump it up to 20%. Or you get married, right? And you talk to your spouse and they're like, you're crazy. Like 50% savings rate, we can never do that. But then introduce him or her to the concept of, honey, like we could live off of my paycheck and we could invest yours and show him or her the graph and be like, look, if we could be done. We could be, neither of us would have to work after 17 years with a 50% savings rate. I think that it does sound hard, but like a lot of good things are hard.
Yeah, and it's worth it because of the freedom to choose.
Exactly.
You mentioned even going from 5 to 10%. Just looking at the graph, that would take you from about 66 years of work to 51. So about 15 years cut off. Just going from 5 to 10% rate, and that's probably the biggest jump.
It is the biggest
in the
jump,
chart.
Yeah.
But that's huge.
Yeah.
And the similar concept we talked last time about debt. That's how we got out of debt so fast. Is that when my wife started getting a paycheck, we only had one kid at the time. All of hers went to debt.
Right.
We did retirement and all of our bills out of mine.
Yep.
And then our car payment at the time came out of mine, and then all of hers just went to accelerating debt.
Yep.
So similar principle of, if you have a second stream of income from a spouse or whatever, then you take advantage of it, whether it's for debt and then one day for financial independence numbers. So it's a very powerful tool. The percentage of money that you put aside for savings.
Yeah. I think it's something that's not talked about a lot in personal finance, but it really is such a powerful tool, and it just, again, it empowers you, right? It gives you the power to decide. And you can dial it up and down, right? So like I was saying, when we were younger, we were saving 50% of our paycheck. Well, we moved to Hawaii, and we looked around and we said, you know what, we want to live in a house with a pool, and we're gonna have to cut our savings rate from 50% to 40%, and that's okay.
Hashtag worth it.
Yeah. Like the pool is great.
Yeah.
We love the house, and besides the dogs, our neighbors' dogs, but yeah, it's like, and if I look at the graph, I'm like, okay, I had to whatever percent, however many years that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
I might have to work 2-3 more years, but in actuality, like that expense, right? Like that additional that drop in savings rate from 50% to 40%, it's kind of temporary because we're only going to live in Hawaii for 3 years, and wherever we go next for our next assignment or wherever we move to next, we can
choose again.
We can choose again.
Yeah,
right? If we go to a low cost living area, right, like Alabama or somewhere else in the South, we can decide that, hey, exactly, we can make the choice again.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
It's freedom, choices.
Probably one of the other misnomers about a high savings rate is that you can't have any fun, or you can't.
Oh, yeah.
You're a cheapskate if you do that. I guarantee you, if you don't know Spencer or me, neither of us don't spend money. I would say I'm frugal in some parts. My dad is, beat that into us.
It comes out sometimes.
You
do order water a lot when we go out to restaurants.
Yeah, I don't like paying for $14
or refillable sodas.
Yes, I don't like paying for $14 drinks. But I have other ways, and we splurge. Our great trip to Lanai we talked about in the past.
First episode, I think we talked about the trip to Lanai, and that was $1,000 a night hotel.
Yeah.
Which, granted, we got it a lot cheaper because of travel hacking, which we'll cover in another episode.
Which we learned, and it's all on militarymoneymanual.com.
Or check out the website, but I think the point is
choosing what to splurge on.
Exactly, exactly. And for instance, we have one car. It's a Mazda 3. It cost, I think it was $21,000 when we bought it.
7 years ago?
7 years ago.
Yeah.
And my wife, she has a little e-bike she gets around town on. But we've been a one-car family for the last 7 years. And, I make it sound like it's a sacrifice, but it really wasn't. Like, we designed our life so that we could only have one car. But that allowed us to, have these much higher savings rates.
Yeah.
So I think for a lot of people, they spend money and they're not intentional on what's actually making you happy, what's bringing you happiness, and spending money on those things. And like one thing that we looked at doing right before the pandemic in February 2020, as I went and test drove a Tesla, and I was like, man, this is a really cool car. Like my next car will definitely be a Tesla. But then I got on my Mazda, which has 80,000 miles on it, and I thought, this thing's
fine.
The car's fine. It gets me from point A to point B.
Yeah.
It's got, it plays music. The AC works.
Yeah.
So
good gas mileage.
Good gas mileage. So at the time, I decided that the additional happiness the Tesla would bring me was not worth it. And again, so maybe that moved making that choice, right? Like meant that my financial independence number was now 3 years closer. Mm-hmm. And that was a choice. I got to make that choice. I could have made a different choice, right? I could have said, no, I'm going to buy the Tesla, and I'm going to accept the fact that I've just pushed my financial independence out 3 months or whatever it is.
And it would not have made you a horrible person.
Exactly.
It's okay.
It's okay.
But you get to choose.
It's okay to spend money.
Right. And I think maybe our parents' generation just assumed that we had to work forever.
Exactly.
Retire with the same company.
Yep.
I don't know. Like, as my parents get older, I was like, I don't want to be working as long as they are.
Yeah. Mom, Dad, I love you, but, I don't want to work to 70.
Yeah.
Well,
so much goodness.
But let me rephrase that. Like, I want to have the choice, right? Like, if I'm doing something I love, like, maybe I'm still working on this website in 50 years, right? Like, it's all virtual reality now or something, right? But, what I want to be doing is helping people, right? And if that means I'm just helping my family and I'm not working, that's fine. But if it means that I can, mentor people like through my website, then probably I don't think I'll ever stop doing that.
But it's also your choice to continue to do that,
Exactly.
not because you literally won't be able to pay the rent
Right.
or your power bill
Right, exactly.
that month. And
Right.
I think that's a scary proposition that so many Americans feel trapped in that mindset of, if I don't continue to work, then I'm relying off of the government medical system in a senior assisted living home or something like that,
Right.
with no one to help.
Yeah, it's a very limiting and choiceless place to be.
Yeah.
And it's financial independence really buys back the freedom that as humans, not just Americans, but humans that we cherish, right? Like
Yep.
that's when we're happiest, right? Is when we're free.
Yeah.
So
again, 50% seems overwhelming.
Yeah.
95% seems overwhelming. That overwhelms me a little bit. But there's some people who are going to be able to.
I
do
know
that
in Silicon
and,
Valley,
do
there's
it.
guys making $400K a year.
Yeah.
They live in a trailer in the parking lot of Google or Apple or whatever, and their expenses are $10,000 a year.
Yeah.
And their savings rate's 95%.
Yeah.
And they'll do that for 2 years, and then they'll be, they'll quit.
No, they're good if they want to. Yeah.
If they want to,
Yeah.
right? But so I mean, it's all about, now that's not a sacrifice I'm willing to make, right? Like I will never live in a trailer in my company parking lot. I just will not do that, right? I'm gonna live in a house.
Yeah.
I'm gonna drive a car, there's one guy, Early Retirement Extreme. I don't know if you ever read any of
No,
this
I haven't.
stuff. ERE, and I'm pretty sure he lived in like the Bay Area, lived on $4,000 a year. Maybe it's $8,000 a year, but for like
Wow.
a decade. And he would just, he would free cycle things, he would repair things, and he was like an engineer making like, 6 figures a year.
Yeah.
And he just didn't think it was efficient to spend money, and so he just saved it and then ended up financially independent,
Yeah.
So
The concept of having to do it just because that's what everyone else is doing in the way that, whether TV or Hollywood, like your family or whoever is portrayed to you that you have to work to your 70, there's options. And that's really the heart of what we're talking about here. You controlling your savings rate gives you the option to choose when to stop working or when to switch to a job that maybe you go for a nonprofit that you're really passionate about, and they can't pay you anything or very, very low as a independent contractor or some consultant or something, but you just love the work so much that you want to do it.
Right.
Lots of goodness there.
Yeah, no, this was a great conversation. I really enjoyed what we just talked about. So, once again, we're running through, unless you got anything else to add for the end of the episode, but in summary, we're going through 9 money principles to live your life by. These are all from my new book, The Military Money Manual. It's available at militarymoneymanual.com and Amazon. And the 9 principles, again, are spend less than you earn, don't accumulate debt, and pay down your high interest rate debt ASAP. We covered those 3 topics in the last episode. In this episode, we talked about saving a 3-month emergency fund, why that's so important, maximizing your tax advantage retirement contributions, and we just wrapped up a lengthy discussion on remembering that your savings rate beats investment return when you're trying to achieve financial independence rapidly.
Can we get a quick preview of part 3 of the 9 principles for the next time?
Yep. And
get a little cliffhanger there to keep everyone coming back for more.
So, in the next episode, we're going to be talking about what I like to call the LADS system of investing. So that's low cost, automatic, diversified, and simple, also known as LADS. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about spending your money and what matters most to you, which we kind of touched on a little bit
we did.
In this episode about when we talked about freedom and choices. And then finally, the last of the 9, buy income producing assets, don't buy liabilities. So that's what we're going to talk about next time. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and remember, just do something.